Hello and welcome to the webinar organized by Center for Publication Ethics and Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. Our speaker for today is Dr. Sanjay Pai. Dr. Pai has been a consultant pathologist at the Tata Memorial Hospital, India's premium cancer institute, and later at Manipal Hospital, Bangalore. He is currently at Manipal Hospital, Yeshwanthpur, which was previously named as Columbia Asia Referral Hospital, Bangalore. Additionally, he is on the working committee of the National Medical Journal of India, working editor of Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and was on the editorial board of Current Sciences, and was an executive editor of Indian Journal of Cancer. Dr. Pai is an author of many research papers and chapters in various books, a referee for numerous medical journals. Recently, he has been elected as the Director India of World Association of Medical Editors, WAME. Now I request Dr. Pai to shed light on today's topic, recent changes in medical publishing, effects of COVID-19.
Okay. Thank you, Sanchita, Dr. Girish Tillu and Shubha Nagarkar for inviting me today for this talk, which you guys have chosen. I'm telling you this because many people have told me, Ari, that's a wonderful topic that you've chosen to talk on. And I had to admit, it's not my idea, it was Girish's idea. But thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys and to talk with you guys and learn from you all. So without much ado, let me start off trying to figure out how to share the screen. Yeah, okay, fine. Okay, can you guys see it now? The impact of COVID-19 on medical publishing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So, to begin with, my editorial associations, as you guys have just been told, are four: the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics and the National Medical Journal of India, both of which I am associated with even now. Current Science, which I was associated with for the last 5 years, just finished my term, and Indian Journal of Cancer, which I was associated with from 2017 to 2020. Now, as editors and as readers, the one word that we kept seeing over and over and over again over the past 2.5 years was "in these unprecedented times." And this was the most boring word, most boring phrase for all editors to keep seeing all the time. And I'm certain for readers too. I don't know how many readers realized it, but for editors, it was definitely a boring word. And last week, I just decided to see how boring was boring. And I did a PubMed search and I put in unprecedented and COVID-19 and found that there were 5,853 results. That means this word unprecedented has come in the title or the abstract in over 5,000 papers in the past couple of years. And also the other thing that we kept seeing all the time was this term, the new normal. And I honestly don't know what that new normal means. The reason I say that is change is constant. There was change after World War II. There was change after a civil rights movement in the US. There was change after all kinds of vaccinations, including especially perhaps the smallpox vaccine. There has been tremendous change after the internet, great change after smartphones, and of course now after the Ukraine-Russia war has started. Change is constant and all of them lead to a new normal. And so I don't know why we had to keep using the word new normal for COVID and for post-COVID era. The other term that we have also been reading about right from mid-2020 and more so now is the word long COVID. But long COVID to me makes sense because we are talking about long-term effects of a disease about which we know very little about. And so long COVID, one of the effects of long COVID, in my opinion, has been that on medical publishing. And I'll come to that soon, obviously over the next 1 hour. But before that, COVID-19 has led to lots of disagreements over the past 2.5 years. There have been disagreements on this. Was it a natural pandemic or was it an accidental pandemic? Did something escape from the laboratory in Wuhan? Was it a natural pandemic or was it a man-made or engineered virus by the Chinese? Was it useful to have a lockdown? Was it not useful to have a lockdown? Are masks useful or are masks useless? Is it good to use ivermectin or HCQS or so many other medications versus what we are doing right now, waitful watching, do not treat everybody? And finally, as Novak Djokovic would say, vaccine versus no vaccine is also a disagreement with many people have. And I say and more because in the United States, it's also been this Democrat versus Republican or liberal versus conservative argument, which has been heightened because of COVID-19. Now, in the flyer that was sent to you guys, I wrote about 4 changes which have taken place in the world of medical publishing since COVID-19 happened. And I referred to the bottom 4 out here. But while preparing for this talk over the past 1 week or so, I thought of 2 other changes which I have included out here. Those are the top 2. The first is, of course, COVID-19 papers are free to all if you have online access to journals or newspapers. Secondly, there has been quicker acceptance of COVID-19 papers. Third, excessive publication of COVID-19 papers. Fourth, research misconduct has been in the news more so over the past 2 years. Fifth, the importance of preprints. And finally, the impact that it has had on impact factors. I'll take the first. COVID-19 papers free to all or free for all. And science and medical journals, and I say most, but not all, opened up and made open access all articles on COVID-19. And I say most, but not all, because for some peculiar reason that I cannot fathom, many journals in surgical pathology, which is my field, have decided not to make all papers open access. They have made some papers open access, but not all. I can't figure out why, and presumably someday I shall find out why. But in the meanwhile, what other newspapers and journals did was they said we shall make it open access, and it was not out of any great sense of charity. It was only common sense and the need to survive and the fear of death that prevailed. The thinking was, I have information that may be useful to some researcher somewhere who might be able to come out with more information and knowledge and perhaps a cure for COVID, and that might one day help save my life. That was the main reason that it was opened out for. Let's be very, very clear about it. And what some journals did was, in order to save time, in order to speed up processes, once a manuscript was accepted for publication, they hosted Word documents of that paper rather than wait for PDFs to be prepared and then hosted. So this is again unique because until now, Word documents have never been hosted as journal papers. The second change was quicker acceptance of COVID-19 papers. All of us know that referees take forever and a day to accept papers and to referee them, or to referee them and to accept them, or to comment on them. But with COVID-19, there was this change that there was faster peer review, there was faster online publication, and even faster print publication. Obviously, space is at a premium, and this had to be done at the expense of non-COVID-19 papers. The Indian Journal of Cancer, I was editor of the Indian Journal of Cancer in 2020 when COVID struck. And I invited an article from the director of Tata Memorial Hospital on how a cancer hospital dealt with COVID-19 pandemic. I asked him to write it in April 2020. We delayed publication of the issue by a few days, maybe about a week or so that the article could be published in the April 2020 issue. Had I waited and not published it in the April 2020 issue, it would have been pushed to July 2020. And that would have been 3 months lost, which would have been a lot of time at a time when there's a pandemic. So it made sense to delay publication of an issue by maybe a week so that the article got published on time and have greater access to everybody. My own mantra during COVID-19 was not to follow the usual technique. The usual thing that we do as editors is we send out papers to potential referees and invite them to referee the paper. If they referee it, fine. If they don't, we don't know for a couple of weeks whether they're going to referee it or not, and then we lose time. But for all the COVID-19 papers, I would talk to a referee first and say, I got a paper on COVID-19. I would like you to referee it, and I'd like you to referee it fast. Will you do it? Only when they would say yes would I send it to that person. Now, you could argue that ideally I should do it for every paper because all papers are important. But the reality is one has only so many hours at once. One has only so many hours in a day and can only do so much. So we would send it out to potential referees and then request them or beg them to send it in time, which, let me add, they almost always did. The other thing that we kept hearing about over the past couple of years is we kept hearing about excess publication. And what is excess publication? How do you define excess publication? I really don't know how this can be defined, because we are talking about something entirely different, a pandemic, something which we know nothing about and which is taking lives. So when we don't know the denominator very well, how can you figure out whether the numerator is more or less? So excess publication is something difficult to define. And let me add, however, out here a conflict of interest. I too have a paper on the subject of COVID. But it's not only now that we're talking about having excess publication in COVID. If you see this paper from Science in May 2020, this article says scientists are drowning in COVID-19 papers. Can new tools keep them afloat? And it refers to the fact somewhere in this article that there were 4,000 articles on COVID in the previous week. So it says you can only imagine what's going to happen in the future. And well, we know what's happened in the future. There were more and more papers on this. I was able to find out in one of the papers that I read last week that 4% of papers published in 2020 were on COVID-19. I don't know the number of papers published in 2021 which were on COVID-19, but I would presume that it is at least 4% and maybe even a little more. This race to publish was because everybody had and has, and I'm sure can say will have an opinion on the cause and or the treatment. Even Donald Trump, who has no scientific background, had an opinion on COVID. Now you'd wonder why everybody has an opinion on this. And should everybody have an opinion on it? And should everybody publish on it? We have two things out here which are equal and balanced and opposite, really. And one is what Louis Pasteur said, chance favors the prepared mind. And so those who are in the field of infectious disease or immunology would have a better understanding of the disease process and would be able to publish. And those would be the ones who have the prepared mind. However, let's get back to exactly 100 years ago when insulin was discovered by Banting, Best, MacLeod, and Collip, of which Banting was a failed general surgeon, Best was a medical student, MacLeod was professor of physiology, but he was on a fishing expedition in Scotland, and finally Collip was the only biochemist in the team, and he came in last to join them to help them purify insulin. So insulin was discovered by 4 guys, of whom 2 knew nothing about the subject. A third had a reasonably good idea, but was maybe 4,000 or 5,000 miles away. And the last one who joined them was the only one who really understood biochemistry. So if they could discover insulin, why can somebody who does not have a background, does not have a prepared mind, have an opinion and perhaps come out with something important on COVID? Now here's a letter from the British Journal of Surgery, and this is in early 2020. And the author writes, the pandemic of COVID has disrupted global health in a proportion unparalleled, that's the other word, unparalleled in modern history. And it says there's an invisible pandemic as harmful as a virus itself, the race to publish. He continues, the motivation of researchers in this race to publish is also concerning, as it can be fueled by many non-scientific motives, hierarchical, political, personal, unbalanced media attention. For example, hydroxychloroquine, academic bullying, commercial, strategic, abuse of power and or sexism, none of which are in the best interest of the scientific community. And here's a slide which I used in a talk which I gave just day before yesterday. Why do people cheat in science? And people cheat in science for publish or for perish reasons, for promotions, for fame, for monetary rewards, and because they have the messiah complex where they believe they know the truth and are able to get to the truth although nobody else knows about it. And really, what difference is there between this slide and the previous slide? None at all. But in response to this letter in the British Journal of Surgery was a letter to the editor, also from the UK. And here he say we read this letter with interest and they commend editors, etc. Next paragraph they say the authors also state that the race to publish is not in science's best interest. This we must respectfully disagree with. And they continue that we see it fitting that scientists and medical professionals turn their undivided attention to this monumental problem. Look at the last line, the COVID brain drain will surely expedite a solution. They continue, next paragraph. Further, as the pandemic progresses, The flurry of academic activity has given authors a glimmer of hope through the darkness of lockdown. Of course, it would be preferable if it could apply ourselves to global warming, etc., etc. But let us not chastise our hard-working colleagues writing up their novel ideas. Let us be a supportive community, scientific community, offering methodological support and enthusiasm as we still have a long way to go before reclaiming our crown from coronavirus. So it says the race to publish is not really an ethical issue because it is necessity. It is necessary for us to discover a cause and a cure for COVID. But just how this race to publish works, I did tell you that editors did give preference to papers on coronavirus or on COVID-19. And I did get many papers as editor over the past couple of years where there was absolutely nothing to do with COVID-19, but the word COVID-19 had been introduced in the abstract or the title. And I could not share any of those papers with you because of confidentiality reasons. But here is a paper which I found on Medline, which has been published. And it says, reconstruction of complete tracheal resection with cardiopulmonary bypass support following bullhorn injury in neck during coronavirus disease 19 pandemic lockdown. And I read this paper today, and the authors say that there is only one earlier report of tracheal transection by a bullhorn, but this is the first one that has been published during a coronavirus 19 lockdown. So apart from that one line, there is no other reference to COVID in this paper. So whether this was COVID-19 or not didn't matter. They are talking about a tracheal transection which they have managed to reconstruct. I mean, you could even write this was the first one on a Tuesday, and the next paper could be the first one on a Wednesday, and the next one could be the first one on a Thursday. It was absolutely meaningless. They could just have stopped at bullhorn injury in the neck. The message would have been clear. As far as research misconduct is concerned, the best known examples are, of course, the papers in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet, which were retracted and where there were Indian authors of Indian origin in it, but from the United States of America, as we know. There was also at the same time a preprint, which was also published by the same company, Surgisphere, which was retracted. I'm sure you guys have read enough and more and much more about this over the last couple of years, so I will not go into this. Suffice it to say that, yes, these were great areas of concern for the medical journal and editor community when these papers were retracted and when they were indeed published in the first place. But I was surprised to read this statement last week in a paper. I forget who the author is, but these guys looked at papers on retraction watch, and they calculated that the percentage of COVID-19 papers retracted is about the same as non-COVID-19 papers over the past couple of years. And this I found surprising because everybody's been talking about the increase in research misconduct. And these guys, and that's a general belief. And you seem to be aware of people who have had papers retracted. You seem to be aware of having read in the newspapers or in the journals about papers being retracted. But here was hard data which said that the papers retracted were about the same, the percentage. But I was honestly still not convinced because of this. So this morning I did a Medline search and I looked at Medline, and as you can see, PubMed rather, from 2020 to 2022, I looked up retraction notice, and I found that there were 908 papers which had a retraction notice in the past 2 years. But if I looked up retraction notice and COVID, there were only 20 papers, which is obviously a very, very low percentage of papers. This didn't make sense to me because I would have expected there to be more. So then what I did was I looked up retracted article and COVID and found 278 articles in the same period of time. And then with the same keyword, retracted article, for 2020 to 2022, I found 8,087 results. So clearly, the number of papers which have been retracted in COVID are probably not more than what one would expect. And clearly, it means research misconduct exists with or without COVID. So research misconduct exists, but there is no point, there is no reason to blame COVID for having had an apparent increase in research misconduct and in retractions. The next change that comes about is what used to happen in the past. And Franz Ingelfinger, who was a very, very influential editor of the New England Journal of Medicine in the 1960s, he introduced the Ingelfinger rule. So this mantra said essentially, thou shalt not publish elsewhere if thou wishes to publish in my journal, and my journal being the New England Journal of Medicine. And Ingelfinger was very clear that if you published a paper in some other journal in any form, or if you spoke to the press, or if your findings turned up in the media somewhere or the other, then you could not submit the paper to the New England Journal of Medicine. He was very clear that he wanted his journal to have first access to all of the data. And that was one of the reasons, one of the things that they used to improve what ultimately was the citation factor of the New England Journal of Medicine. Over a period of time, all journals have followed suit, and all journals are clear that their journal has to be the first one where a paper has to be submitted if it has to be published there. You cannot publish elsewhere. And that is one of the reasons that when you submit a paper to any journal, you give in a comment or you state that this article is being submitted only to this journal, and we have not submitted it elsewhere simultaneously. Now, Ingelfinger started this for the New England Journal of Medicine, but over a period of time, other journals also followed suit. And, well, other media also. That's why you have these exclusives on TV or in newspapers. You have TRPs, you have exclusives to television where you talk to one channel and not to the other. So essentially it's the same thing. You want to show that you are special and you have beaten the rest of it to that piece of news or that piece of information. But everything changed with COVID-19. And here was an editorial by Eric Rubin in the NEJM, which says medical journals and the 2019 nCoV outbreak. And he says we are putting into plan new practices. And the last line of this paragraph says we also encourage authors to submit their work for posting on preprint servers. I can assure you this is something that they had not done before. So this was something new. And elsewhere in the journal, they state preprint posting. NEJM accepts the submission of manuscripts that have previously been posted on a non-profit preprint server. Authors should notify NEJM of any preprint related to a manuscript submission. That's all. Just notify them about it. It's not like they will reject it because of that. In fact, they accept it. As if this is not enough, in their instructions to authors, where they talk about no prior publication, and they say when making manuscript decisions, the editors strongly consider the accuracy, novelty, and importance of submission and strive to ensure that an independent peer review occurs before public dissemination. Hence, we will not consider any manuscript that has been published elsewhere and where primary results have been released except, and they talk about, look at the second one, posting a manuscript on a non-profit preprint server for feedback from the scientific community. So this was something new, and I mentioned it twice or thrice in the issue to make it very, very clear that you know what they're talking about and what they're accepting. But let's then go back 50 or 60 years and have a brief history of the preprint. All of us know what preprints are today. Very interesting for you guys to know that preprints were quite the opposite 60 years ago. In fact, preprints began in the world of particle physics and astrophysics, and to my surprise, in molecular biology. And I say my surprise, molecular biology, because the first preprint in molecular biology was in 1961. And if you realize, molecular biology began off in the late 1950s. It had to be after the DNA, the structure of DNA was described by Crick and Watson. And so molecular biology began off in the late 50s and early 60s, and preprints had already come into place in 1961 in MolBio. But particle physics and astrophysics is where they really took off and where they're still popular apparently. But a preprint then was truly a preprint, as the name suggests, not what it is today. A preprint then was an accepted paper, a paper which was accepted by a journal, often took 1, 2, or even 3 years for it to get published in a journal, in which time valuable time and data was lost. So what authors would do, and this is authors of institutions which had the money, let's face it, they would actually sit and uh, type out these papers all over again and then send it to important colleagues or competitors or libraries across the world so that they would have access to this information well before it was actually printed in the journal. Hence, pre-print. They were all, or they were usually peer-reviewed papers and which had been accepted as science but had not been actually printed in the journal, and therefore you would not have had access to it. Today, a preprint has an entirely different meaning. Today, when we talk about a preprint, we are talking about something which is non-peer reviewed, which you host on the web the moment you have seen, the moment you have written it up. Yes, okay. It's called a preprint repository now, and there are about 50 preprint repositories on the web, of which Archive, BioArchive, medRxiv, SSRN, and Research Square are perhaps among the best known. Archive is for physics, BioArchive for biology, medRxiv for medicine, and so on. And I found to my great surprise this morning that there's something called, well, hold your breath, India Archive, preprints repository server for India. And it says there are papers in arts, applied science, COVID-19, of course, has to get a special box, formal science, I don't know what that means, humanities, natural science, and interdisciplinary studies. So I found this very interesting, and I find that the latest paper which has been put up here as a preprint is Analysis of the Delhi Unified Buildings Bylaws 2016 with respect to the integration of provisions of the National Building Code. Then I looked up applied science, COVID-19, formal science, and natural science and interdisciplinary studies. And all of them said there are no papers hosted on this as yet. So I don't know. This has been hosted in May, if I remember right. And I do not know why nobody has hosted papers on this. There's a long editorial board out here somewhere on this site. I don't recognize any. I recognize one of the names, sorry, but I don't recognize most of the names. And I do not know why there are no more papers on this at the moment. But perhaps this is fairly new and people don't know about it and will soon learn about it maybe after this talk and can host their preprints on this repository. Now, my problem with preprints all these years, and this is something from an email which I sent to somebody, we've been discussing this over the past couple of months, the importance or the lack of importance, whatever, of preprints. And I emailed this person, said that a preprint stating that the universe is 20 billion years old and not 13.8 billion years old, as has been believed, and is later proved to be wrong, won't kill anybody. But a preprint which states that, say, vaccines are useless for rubella and is later proved to be a wrong hypothesis, will result in many not getting the vaccine to their ultimate detriment. So that is my one problem, that people can misuse information or misunderstand information which is put out there, and it can lead to disability or disease or death, whereas something like the universe being 20 years old, 20 billion years old is not going to kill anyone. My second problem is there are, I think, 68 journals in pathology. I look at the table of contents of maybe 7 or 8. I don't have the time to look at the remaining 60. If there is going to be a burgeoning preprint literature, how on earth is one supposed to keep up with it? I can't keep up with a bare minimum. How am I going to keep up with even more? So these were my objections. And in the discussions that we've had, and by reading on the subject, I discovered other objections to preprints. First and foremost is, of course, the fact that there is no peer review and anybody can write anything out there, just like you can put anything on Google. I mean, you can host anything on your blog. You can put any hypothesis on your blog. Similarly, you can put up any junk out there and it stays out there. So there's no peer review. Secondly, was pointed out in some article which I have not realized and which I accept. Papers in economics and social science especially are also have potentially are areas of potential harm. I had thought of medicine only, but I realized even social science can lead to great harm if misused. There is a rush to publish with no gatekeeper. In other words, there's no editor and there is no peer review. There can be improper media coverage, and we as it is have a problem of fake news. it will increase. The fake news will increase with the use of preprints. And finally, what will happen is there will be premature data getting out there, and which might be used by the media without their understanding. But the most common reason given by proponents of peer review is, but peer review has failed. Peer review has failed. Peer review is not a success. We know it doesn't do well. And invariably, they've had examples to give. And over the past couple of years, they give the example of the HCQS paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, the Surgisphere paper in New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet, and say that these are the best known journals in the world. They must have gone through rigorous peer review and junk papers were published. But to me, peer review is still important because just as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all others. To me, peer review is the worst form of checking how good a paper is, except for all others. Also, when you say peer review has failed, I'm reminded of the statement from the Bible, who among us is without sin? Peer review has failed sometimes, yes, but it has succeeded a lot of times. If you are going to be only looking at the few occasions that peer review has failed, you are missing the point. You could also point out that if a pathologist has made a misdiagnosis, or if a batsman has hit zero you don't hit, you get out for zero in a cricket match, or if a surgeon has a patient with a post-op complication, you can't call those people bad pathologists or batsmen or surgeons just because they've had a one-off thing. You have to look at the majority when they do well, just as peer review has by and large done well. The other pro of preprint, of course, is that it is quick. The moment you've written your paper, you can host it on the web so that others can have a look at it. Unlike conventional publication, which takes weeks to months to even years publication. The other advantage which has been pointed out of preprints is that there is no fake peer review. What is fake peer review? Some of you would be wondering. Now, what happens is sometimes when you send a paper to a journal, the authors who are absolutely unethical somehow maneuver to get the paper sent to themselves in their avatar as peer reviewers. They, for instance, supply potential referees names and email IDs to the editor, and actually it is an email ID which leads back to them. And so the unsuspecting editor sends the paper to this person, not knowing that it is the author himself or herself. And usually it is a himself, let's accept it. And they send in a referee comment saying this is a lovely paper and I think you should accept it, and gets accepted. But this kind of a thing will never happen with a preprint because, well, if you referee it, you're not going to criticize it. So there's no question at all of putting in a peer review. It is truly open and democratic science because everybody has access to the science, everybody has access to the data. It has been shown that the presence of preprints leads to increased citations. So those of you who are interested in citations and in impact factors would be happy to know that it helps to have preprints. And perhaps the most important thing, in my opinion, is that negative results can be published. Most journal editors do not like to publish papers with negative results. They think it's a waste of space, whereas it's very, very important to publish negative results. If you have a paper with a negative result and you host it on a preprint server, it's out there. It doesn't cost you anything to publish. You can put it out there. Now, somebody recently looked at preprints versus prints and looked at retractions and found that this is in retractions in COVID-19 and found that 40 preprints were retracted and 143 print papers were retracted on the subject of COVID. But for the preprints, on an average, it took 29 days to retract the paper, but it took 139 days to retract papers which were in print journals. And interestingly, these print journals which were peer reviewed, 6 journals contained 34.7% of the retractions. So obviously, all is not hunky-dory with peer review and with journals. And this professor of medicine, Peter Horby at Oxford, published a paper a couple of months ago in Nature Medicine, and he wrote why preprints are good for patients. And he explained in this paper that on June 16, 2020, steroids that there was a meeting, a press conference held at 10 Downing Street, where in the presence of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, it was announced that a study which had just been done showed that steroids were useful in the treatment of COVID-19. And they recommended to the NHS and, of course, then to the rest of the world that steroids be used in the treatment of COVID immediately, although it had not been peer reviewed, it had not been published as yet. This paper was subsequently peer reviewed and went online on July 17, 2020. That is 31 days later. But as has been pointed out, there were 700,000 cases of COVID worldwide in this 1 month. So think of the number of lives which were saved out of these 700,000 because steroids were used in treatment immediately from June 16th and nobody had to wait until July 17th. And this author says that in a health emergency, different rules must apply. And then he concludes that because of this and because we've gotten used to this, preprints are here to stay. He also adds that students must be taught to read papers better, because if you're going to be reading preprints, you should learn how to make judicious use of that information. Of course, you should be able to make judicious use of even published papers, that goes without saying, which is not easy. But this is a paper I read in 1995 in the British Medical Journal, and I suddenly remembered it last night, and I hunted the BMJ and located this. And here are guys who are 25 years ahead of their time. And these guys, the first one is from Pittsburgh, that's all I remember. They write about the death of biomedical journals. And it says the musky scent of aging paper in our libraries evokes an atmosphere of scholarship, etc., etc. But it says the clicks, beeps, and whirs of computers linked to the internet are the coming revolution. There are going to be journals in the future which are going to be only on the net. And in the balance, I think preprints are easy to publish and to disseminate. They're easy for everybody to criticize and, if necessary, have the paper retracted. And it solves the problem of fake peer review. And yes, negative results can be published. 1 week ago, when I was asked to talk on this, I was absolutely anti-preprints. I won't say I'm absolutely pro-preprint now, but having given it a lot of thought and having read quite a bit about it over the past 1 week, I have to say I'm at the very least ambivalent and probably pro or somewhat in favor of preprints at the moment. And Dr. Lakhotia from Varanasi writes in his email, and I have his permission to write this, he emailed me and said, I believe that preprints should be as they are. Check only for plagiarism, etc., as is done currently, and then host it on the web. He says any kind of peer review, if you decide to do for a preprint, leads to the same old problems that you had before with journals. So he says, do a plagiarism check and put it out there. This is something which should have come one slide before. This is the death of biomedical journals, the cartoon which went along with that article. Now, I'm going to give you another example from medicine and from my hospital about how I compare this, a metaphor for preprints. And I go on to electronic health records. Until 2008, laboratory values were in the black hole between 6 p.m. when I left hospital and between 9 a.m. when I got back to work the next morning. This is true not just for me, but for all hospitals across the world. At night, lab reports are not released to patients because there's nobody to sign out the report. What would happen is if there were critical values, if there were what were known as panic values, somebody from the lab would call up and inform the ward about it. But for routine things, there would be no information. What that would then mean is that there would be multiple phone calls from the wards for certain patients who are worried, or for certain physicians who are worried about certain patients and who the lab did not know about. And that would be a lot of waste of time for us. But in 2008 onwards, we had a change in hospital practice, because until 2008, we had the usual conventional paper files and paper reports. We had electronic health records introduced in 2008. And then values could be seen on the screen in the hospital wards 24/7, but with a proviso. And here is that proviso. You can see in red, it states, the report not validated by a pathologist. Please interpret accordingly. So this is like a preprint. This is what we have. And what we found was that it was very, very occasional that we had to go ahead and change this report. Most of the time, this report would remain the same. An occasional platelet count would change because of giant platelets or some such thing, but then physicians were aware of that and they had been told about it right from the beginning that an occasional, maybe once a week or so, there would be some change in the report. Usually a minor change, occasionally a major change. But if you compare that with the number of problems that we had until 2008 because reports were not available, this was far better and far more acceptable. So if this works in patient care, why shouldn't it work with medical journals, I ask you. And when I was editor of the Indian Journal of Cancer, we started on this because we had this big backlog and we had 4 issues a year in which articles would get published. We started doing this, full text articles which were published ahead of print. And there we'd convert the Word document which the author had sent into a PDF, get it proofed, and then host it. And as you can see, even now, and this is from yesterday, I think, we have papers from 2020 and 2021 still ahead of print on the web and not yet published. That's because of the backlog of papers. This is still pretty good because it's out there and people can access and quote it and what have you. But ideally, you want to get rid of this and put it on paper and finish it off. And if you look at Indian Journal of Ophthalmology, it says there are no articles available at this time. Please try again later. It is extremely unlikely that every paper which has been submitted to IJO has been published. So that means they have not been able to, I am assuming it means that they have not been able to get all papers which are ahead of print onto the web. Why? Because it takes time. Ultimately, even converting a Word document into a PDF takes time, and editors have not been able to find time to do that. So what I would do now, if I was still editor of the paper, and I say what I would do asterisk from the safety of my armchair. I'm not an editor, so it's easy for me to sit out here and give gyan to you poor editors who are sitting out there and who might have to hear this from readers or authors who are listening to this and are then going to get back to you. I would host a published paper immediately after acceptance in Word format. So you send me a paper. Once I have accepted it, I will straight host it in Word format on the web. And what this would lead to is it would save time. You would not be calling me up repeatedly for the next few months asking me when will my paper get published. You'll be saving your time, you'll be saving the editorial office's time. Perhaps then, if readers see errors in this Word format paper, they would send in comments, something like a rapid response. And this could be published at the end of the article with maybe even the author's reply or explanation. I say if, because as an editor, I had a disappointing experience. I found that very few authors, very few readers write in to the editor with letters to the editor with suggestions or complaints or ideas about published papers. But theoretically, this gives you the option to do it. Is it risky? Perhaps. There's only one way to find out, and that is to go out there, host it in Word format and see what happens. Try it as an experiment. If you're not going to experiment, you're never going to get anywhere. And lessons from elsewhere. Dr. Piyush Sani, the editor of the National Medical Journal of India, writes, letters act as the post-publication peer review of an article. So similarly, if you were to send in rapid responses to this, there would be some kind of post-publication, post-preprint peer review of the article. We've already got 2 referee comments. Your comment might be the 3rd one, which you might want to add out there. And what I would do next is if this experiment works, I would move on to the next experiment, which of course is to try genuine preprints. See if hosting a paper, getting comments from everybody works in medicine or not. It might not work, but unless you do it, you're never going to find out. There are other problems which exist with real preprints, and I'm talking about this problem. The Medical Council of India or the Board of Governors or the NMC as it is now have criteria for promotions. And that is you turn from associate professor to professor and continue as professor only if you have a certain number of papers. I don't know the rules because I'm not in a medical college. But how does one evaluate? And these papers have to be in peer-reviewed traditional journals. But how does one evaluate a non-peer-reviewed, non-traditional journal published article? How do you compare quality and quantity of versus quantity of papers. For instance, if you have a real paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine, you can probably be sure that it is probably a good paper. But if you have 20 preprints put up on mid-archive, how do you compare it? How do you compare 1 versus 20? Which is more? So I have no answers to this question, and these are things which we'll have to figure out over a period of time during, well, long COVID. Now, I put my editorial associations out here again because I just want to say that of the 4 journals that I'm associated with, Indian Journal of Medical Ethics and Current Science do accept preprints. I do not know about the other 2. And the last change that has taken place is the impact factor. The impact factor that you all know is the number of times that a paper has been cited over the past couple of years as an average. The pros is it gives you a rough idea as to how good a journal is. There are many cons, and one of the many cons is that 2 years is often not enough to judge the importance of the discovery. And I just use again a metaphor out here. Everything that Alfred Nobel wrote for his plan for the Nobel Prize has been followed. For instance, Alfred Nobel said that there can be no posthumous awards. There are no posthumous awards. Alfred Nobel decreed that the Nobel Prize can be shared at most by only 3 people. So it is shared at most only by 3 people, such that if 4 people have made a discovery, all 4 get left out. So, but the one change that the committee has made is that in the original Alfred Nobel decree, he said that it has to be given to the person who has made the greatest discovery in the past 1 year. But the committee realized very soon that 1 year is too little a period of time in which to decide whether a discovery is important and life-changing. So that they do it for a lifetime of work. But certainly for the impact factor, it's 2 years which counts, and that's too little. Now, the impact factor was introduced 45 years ago. It was the New England Journal of Medicine, which has been first for 45 years in a row. In 2020, it had an impact factor of 91, which means on an average, each paper had been quoted 91 times in the past 2 years. In 2021, it doubled and went up to 176. However, the Lancet, which was number 2 in 2020 and for the last many years, had added 79.3 impact factor in 2020, almost tripled and went to 202.7. In other words, it has overtaken the New England Journal of Medicine for the first time. So this is a COVID-19 impact on the impact factor of the New England Journal of Medicine and of course on the Lancet. Will this convert to long COVID? Is the Lancet going to remain one for the next few or many years, for the next 45 years? Obviously, it's too early to say, but before that, 5 other journals have now an impact factor of over 100, and they include JAMA, Lancet Respiratory Medicine, and that's not a coincidence because COVID is a respiratory disease. Nature reviews drug discovery, Nature reviews immunology, and Nature reviews molecular cell biology. 3 of the top 10 most cited papers in 2021 were in the Lancet, all not unexpectedly were about COVID-19. And this was, of course, the most widely quoted paper of 2020, clinical features of patients infected with 2019 novel coronavirus in Wuhan, China. But here's a comment from Retraction Watch. Phil Davis, and I'm not sure who that is, comments, he's obviously an expert information scientist. He says, no discovery or invention in the history of science can come close to the effect COVID-19 papers had on the citation record in 2021. However, because the impact factor is so sensitive to highly cited papers, some journal scores will reach stratospheric heights this year, only to collapse next year. Unfortunately, this supercharged cycle of boom and bust is only going to fuel a greater sense of skepticism around the meaning and interpretation of the impact factor. So there you are. The impact factor for the Lancet is so high this year. Will it be high next year and the year after that? We don't know. Either way, we'll need to wait and watch. Finally, I'd like to thank many of my colleagues who helped out in my talk, especially Dr. Pandya, Dr. Arunachalam, and Dr. Lakotia, with whom I've been having email exchanges to clear my concepts on, well, impact factors and preprints and what have you. And finally, that's a photograph of my hospital where I work. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for such a excellent lecture, and many things got clear, especially about preprints. Because there are still myths about it, and we talk about which version of the paper should be uploaded and peer review. So there are some questions, and then one or two questions I also have in mind. Let me take some questions first.
Okay.
Uh, there are some anonymous attendees. They ask that can excess means more than normal. If a journal would have received 25 papers in a quarter, it received 100.
I'll accept that, but you see, the times are also different.
Ah.
Times are also different. You got suddenly a new disease which is killing off everybody. You have to expect more. It would be, in fact, if there were 25 papers that you are receiving per, let us say, per day, and there's a horrendous disease like this which has come out, and you get it increases from 25 to 30, I would worry. I would worry about the society if they don't want to address this question, if they don't want to address the problem. So it's
Yes.
difficult to define excess.
Yeah. Second question is preprint servers also came in limelight during the pandemic. What is your opinion? That you already talked about it. That
Yes, they have been around for the last, well, I wouldn't say servers have been around for the last 50 years. Preprints began, like I told you, as actually that. Preprints in the 1960s and 70s when scientists sent copies of their papers. You know, you'd have to have access to a typewriter, and a secretary would sit and repeatedly type out these papers, and then you send it out around. But in the 90s, after the net became popular, it was easy to exchange on email papers. And but even sending a paper on email meant I'll have to sit and type in your email address and send it to 100, 200, or 300 of you. Once these servers came up, I just put it out there and expected you to visit the server and watch it. As the internet keeps exploding and improving and things keep changing, smartphones. Well, smartphones is an excellent example. Until 8 or 9 years ago, you'd have to go to your desktop or to your laptop to see a paper which has been published. Now, when I'm traveling in the metro, I'm able to read papers which I want to, right? I don't have to have access to anything. I can do it standing. I can do, in fact, as I'm talking, if I'm sure of the 120 of you are attending, at least 7 or 8 of you are bored with my talk and are checking their WhatsApp, or are maybe even looking up their latest preprints. So you can do that right now. So yes, there has been an increase in COVID, but that's not because of COVID. It's because of an increase in improvement in technology.
yes, yes. The next question is some articles which had relevance during initial period of pandemic got published quite late. Example, HCQ related or prevention related. Do these publications have any meaning according to you?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure which paper you're referring to, because if it was in a good journal, it would have been published immediately online. And like I said, most journals have gone online and published. So I'm not certain what you mean by late. As for, yes, okay, as an editor at Current Science, I've had one paper in on COVID for which I've been finding it very, very difficult to find a referee. And when this paper does get, if it gets rejected, that's the end of the matter. If it does get accepted and published, you could argue justifiably that this paper has lost, I won't say relevance, because the topic is such that it's an epidemiologic paper. It would be of importance to historians and others over the next many years. It's not a paper which would be of immediate importance in the treatment of someone. But yes, if you were to publish a paper on treatment and delay it by 6 months, it would probably have lost relevance for the people who would have died in those 6 months. For the ones in future, of course, it is still relevant. But that is the reason we've been trying to rush ahead with papers on COVID. And as with all journals and all editors and all papers, you are able to get 90 or 95% of papers on time. There are going to be a few papers which slip through the cracks and you miss it or you forget it and discover much later, and then get an earful from the author justifiably.
Yes, yes. Thank you. The next question is, can WAMI or ICMJ take some decision or action on preprints or issue some advising?
Being asked because I'm director of WAMI. I've been director I've been director of WAMI only for 1 month, and I'm also still trying to find out what I'm supposed to do. But let me put it to the board and see what. But remember one thing, WAMI is a purely voluntary organization. I cannot police you in any way. I can only give you a recommendation. If you want to tear up that recommendation and put it in the closest gutter, you can do it. I can do nothing about it. This is what we think is correct, but we can't force it down your throat.
Right, sir. Then there is question from Dr. Amit Mishra. That what is the condition now? Are papers now published without COVID reference? Because he joined late, so he is asking that papers are now published without the COVID reference. I don't understand the question either, me. So Amit, can you explain it bit so that I can ask sir something what you want to ask? Or we will take, let him type the question again, we will move to the further question. So even good authors are publishing in preprints. This is again from anonymous attendee. It is either for the sake of publication or if the chances of getting published in journal are black, or if the article has got rejected from 2-3 journals. So when we are putting it on preprint.
Now I've gotten onto my phone.
Okay.
Because there's something wrong with the laptop. Anyway.
Okay.
So some question from Amit.
Yes. Amit was asking question that what is the condition now? Are papers now published without COVID reference? But he has not, I think, sent the complete question yet. So we will, yes, Amit has sent again that papers were published last 3 years with COVID-19 included. So many scholars were unable to publish their work and their PhD was delayed. May I know if now journals still give priority to COVID related work?
Okay. First of all, what was his first statement? I disagree with that. What was his first statement?
Papers were published last 3 years with COVID-19 included.
The next statement, sorry, was?
And so many scholars were unable to publish their work.
So many scholars were unable to publish their work, I don't believe, because I've just said that 4% of papers in 2020 were on COVID. That means there's a 96% number of papers that you could publish. 4% of guys might have been pushed out into the next year. That's not the majority.
Yeah.
So I am not going to buy that. What it would mean is, instead of your paper getting accepted in June, it might have got accepted in July, because the referee, you could have seen your paper, has bothered to spend time looking at a COVID paper. That's all. And it also means that instead of your paper getting published in July, it will get published in the October issue. It would only mean a difference of 1 issue at most, because I'm speaking from the experience of my journal, where there would be maybe out of until March 2020, there were 0 articles on COVID, right? Because COVID didn't exist until then, or until January 2020, let us say. From the April issue, we had about 2 out of 20 articles would be on COVID. That's 10% of papers only. So it's not made a great difference. So what it means is 2 articles get pushed to the next issue, and again 2 articles get pushed to the next issue, maybe 3 issues, but not all that many. So I'm not going to buy that. And as for PhD scholars have had problems, I can assure you that about 7 billion people have had problems over the last 2.5 years. So PhD scholars are in no way different. My son was 1 week away from finishing off his mechanical engineering. He's lost 2 years in the process. So a 4-year process has become a 6-year process. So he's got his own set of complaints against COVID. But the fact is, you just accept it and move on.
Yeah, right, sir. Right. Then there was a question which we were talking about. Even good authors are publishing in preprints. Is it either for sake of publication, or if the chances of getting published in journals are black, or if article has got rejected from 2-3 journals? So
you really have to ask those authors that why they published. But like I said, it depends on what their belief or what their philosophy is. Until yesterday, I would have thought that somebody publishes in a preprint server only if the paper is not good and has been rejected by other journals. But now I realize that might not be the same, because there are advantages to putting up. Now, a lot of the COVID-19 papers that have been submitted to our journals, the covering letter says that we have already hosted it on the preprint server, because A, it is allowed, and B, we know that it will take 3 to 6 months to peer review and to publish it. And we think it is important data and lives will be saved if it goes up as a preprint. So they put it over. So maybe these people that you're referring to have published it to save time and have simultaneously or later on submitted it to proper journals, because now it's entirely legal to have a preprint and then send it to a journal. And one of the advantages which I didn't tell you all out there, because I was scared I'd take more than 1 hour, is that when you have a preprint, apparently it helps in collaborations. You put a preprint out there and somebody else around the world says, hey, I've had the same idea, and it collaborates with you. Now, of course, that collaboration would have taken place even after you had published it. But again, that's time lost. So you saved 1 year of collaboration because somebody else has seen it and wants to collaborate with you. So maybe it's been hosted for these reasons.
Yes.
And I read about some guy who won the Fields Medal, $1 million prize, but he has not yet collected it because he's a Sithapragna. He's not interested in money. He's only interested in mathematics, which is it. So maybe there are scientists who post it on preprint servers thinking this is good science. Let somebody make good use of it. I'm really not bothered about promotions or rewards of that sort.
Yes. There is another question. We'll take 1 or 2. I know that you are busy, sir. Namrata is asking, I have a comment on objection to preprints potentially swaying public opinion and causing harm. I believe the public have some responsibility in accepting scientific information only after proper verification. In other words, information coming from their doctor or in the form of a government public advisory instead of accepting random information from the web or news channels.
There are multiple questions in this. First of all, you trust every doctor and you trust every government official. I'm not going to comment on that. Okay. There are doctors who know precious little. There are scientists who could afford to know more, and there are government officials who could definitely afford to know more. So just because they have said something doesn't mean it has to be correct. And well, honestly, expecting the public to be able to interpret and understand a scientific paper is very, very difficult, because, like I said, this article in Nature Medicine says that medical students should be taught to interpret preprints better. The fact is, most medical students, and I'm sure this includes me, find it difficult to interpret even proper scientific papers. You know, I can understand something exactly in my field. That's it. You put something slightly outside of it, I probably won't understand it because it's the age of super specialization. So I only expect that the editor and the referee and the author himself are being honest and are doing a good job and are telling me the truth. I have that much faith in people, and I hope they don't let me down. But to expect the public to understand it would probably be asking for too much. More so when public is more interested in Instagram and fake news and WhatsApp University. So you could argue then that that's an argument against preprints, and I'll accept it's a problem.
Yes.
But no solution is perfect.
Yeah. Okay, I will skip some of the questions. There is another question. In your experience or observation, generally after publication, for how long the paper gets cited? What is the peak time after publication it gets maximum citation?
I don't have any observation or study, but this has been done. You know, the Higgs boson, for instance, was not quoted for 30 or 40 years after, or was quoted 3 or 4 times in the first 10 or 15 years. And then it got a Nobel Prize. So,
yeah.
So no outer limit. And as for, and you're taking citation as, I understand what you mean by citation, but let's look at the Nobel Prize. I refer to insulin, 1921-22. Insulin was discovered in May 1922 and got the Nobel Prize in December 1923. Okay, so that discovery was so important that within 12 months, the Nobel Prize committee realized that this is a discovery which is going to change life. I don't know how many times that paper has been quoted. It doesn't matter. It has changed lives. So that paper has got a Nobel Prize within 1 year. The paper on Higgs boson has not been quoted for years. And there are other examples also, what are called as sleeping beauties. It's
Yes.
called, they're called, yeah, Shubda would understand this better than anybody else. A sleeping beauty is a paper which is published by somebody and which nobody knows anything about. And the best example, until it becomes famous, and the best example of this is Gregor Mendel's paper in 1865. In 1865, he was a monk in Brno in Austria. He published papers on pea genetics in some obscure journal. It was not known of until 1905 or so, when I think it was Hugo de Vries who discovered the papers and published it. So it was not published even, not cited even once in 40 years, but it changed life. So just being cited is one thing, when being cited is another.
Yes.
You also have this Surgisphere paper. It must have been quoted 1,000 times in the first 1 week and never again after that because it was found to be fraud.
Yes. Yes, sir. I think that what Eugene Garfield mentioned in his articles, that who is citing your paper and who is the person and where he is citing, very important. So
Correct.
if one citation in that kind of way, it will be a very good thing. These citations we talk because of it is connected to academic purposes and other things. So a lot of misconceptions are coming up, and many people talk about large number of citations are good always. That is misconception is there.
I'm absolutely against impact factors.
Yes,
That's
yes, sir.
one method.
Correct.
Because it can be gamed very, very easily.
Yes. Yes, Vasumati just mentioned that she loved the idea about journal publishing the Word document format and on acceptance. Are we in an era of pandemic of publications?
Well, one pandemic is probably getting over and becoming endemic. So hopefully this pandemic of publications will also become endemic. This we shall know next year.
Yes. So I think some more questions there are. What is the importance of preprint in case of COVID-19 cases and non-COVID-19 cases as far as publication is concerned? Can you once again detail the same?
I didn't understand.
Yeah.
What is the COVID-19?
Preprints, importance of preprint before and after COVID-19. I think we will ask him again, who is asking this anonymous attendee. So please write down the question again, because he has already explained, sir has already explained about it.
The advantages of preprints are that they're quick to go online.
Yes.
And you can get referee comments from hundreds of people around the world.
Yes.
So those are the advantages. Negative results can be published. Incidentally, if any of you think of questions after this event is over, you can always email me. My email is sanjayApai@gmail, sanjayapai@gmail.com. You can email me, and if I know the answer, I will reply to you.
Yes, sir. We will share your email ID. And then always, sir, Professor Chadda is saying that when you upload it on preprint, you get the date stamp, which will help in if somebody has plagiarized.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that very, very important thing. The question of priority.
Yes, priority. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I just forgot. It's a very, very important thing with preprints. You can claim priority for your discovery. The problem with the publication is if the editor sits on it or if the referee sits on it for 8 months and somebody else publishes in the meantime, you lose priority. I actually know of a very, very important discovery made in science 50 years ago where I have this on a very good source, that the referee sat on it for 9 months, but for those 9 months it lay on his desk and somebody else read that paper, went ahead and did the experiments and went ahead and published a paper on that and has got priority for it. I won't name the journal or the person because obviously I don't want to get sued tomorrow, but very, very reliable information I have on this.
Yes.
So crucial discovery made in biomedical science was stolen, but nobody can prove it.
Yes. Yes, sir. That's why he always suggested that somewhere you get a date stamp so that you can claim that is your research is the first one.
And Dr. Chadda, it is actually who is on the editorial board of the India repository that I had mentioned.
Yes.
I knew there was one name, it's him.
Yeah. Kiran Shinde is asking, sir, I'm doing research study with respect to latency in healthcare application. Can you recommend from where I should refer the data set? Bapre.
I don't know what this means.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
me, or actually Dr. Nagarkar would be a better person as a librarian to be able to tell you.
Yes, sir. We will help, no problem. Yes, sir. And there is one question that I have, that peer reviewers biases. That's where always we talked about it, that we get bias in like some papers get rejected from some geographical area and that kind of things happening. So that is why preprints are good in that case.
Definitely.
And
That is a very good advantage that you talk about. There's
yes,
just one thing, that you must be very clear that the paper has been rejected because of bias and not because of poor science. You know, it's a grapes or sour kind of a thing. If my paper is rejected, I always feel he's biased against me because I'm from India and I sent it to an American journal. I'm not going to accept the fact that it was a lousy paper, because it's like a mother and her baby. You see, to every mother, the baby is the most beautiful baby in the world. To every author, that paper is the most important paper ever written.
yes,
So you're too close to it to see that it's bad science or not. But
yes.
bias could exist, definitely. I'm not denying it. And it could be even the other way around, or anti-bias, if you want to call it. You sitting in India get a paper from a big, or in fact, anywhere in the world, you get a paper from a big name. And you think, oh, it must be good science because it's sent by a big name. But the fact is, even the biggest names in science can make mistakes because, well, we are all human and we can make mistakes. Our hypothesis can be wrong. So you should try not to be biased, but that's easier said than done. I'm certain all of us do make mistakes. It's like you can keep on hitting sixers. One of those sixers is going to become a lolly, an easy catch. You're going to miss it. It's normal to do that.
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you, sir. And then another last question, that I am reading a lot about a paper mills where papers are generated by machines and uploaded on many and accepted even many good medical journals even. So have you came across about it? And I read that there are many thousands of papers are floating around and it is very difficult to find out, but later on they get retracted, of course, but still.
I'm told that a lot of them exist, but I personally have not had any experience of that, probably because I'm no longer editor-in-chief. So these papers are going to land up with editors-in-chief who are going to see and filter at that stage. The ones which they feel are real papers are the ones which are going to be sent to me for further comment or analysis or opinion. So I don't know, but Ria Fernandez, my colleague at one of the journals that I work with, she was telling me recently that this journal has received quite a few papers from very obviously paper mills. So it does exist, and it does exist in Indian journals. I'm not sure whether it's coming from India or from abroad, but we in India, good journals in India are getting such papers very clearly.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah. I read it, worldwide problem. And last question, sir. Gaurav is asking, some promising research are rejected in Ayurveda because of the Ayurveda terminology utilized in the article. It is impossible to provide an English translation for every word. So that may be a problem.
Honestly, the editor is daft. If he's going to expect an English translation of everything in Ayurveda, so you shouldn't publish in such a journal. Frankly, the journal doesn't deserve your paper.
Yeah.
You need to, or maybe you can even put in a comment that this such a thing is untranslatable. So you need to publish in where do you publish? You publish in the journal which is most appropriate for your message. So if yours is a good paper on Ayurveda, you would want to publish it in a good Ayurveda journal where you won't have to explain this. If you want to publish in a non-Ayurveda journal because you want to get your message across, you might want to have a conversation or a dialogue with the editor first. Let that editor look at your paper offline first, come to you with questions like this, and then come to a workable solution. That's what I would recommend for future. Or maybe even if you want to go back right now, some editors are good and they're willing to listen to authors coming back and saying, hey, you rejected my paper, but would you be interested in discussing this with me? Most editors, in fact, say, yes, let's discuss it. They might listen to you and then say, no, it's not worth it, but they'll give you a good patient hearing. I do that at least.
Yes, sir.
And in my experience, every editor that I have argued with has listened to me. They have rejected my paper about half the time after that, and I've accepted it. But they have listened to me. That's all I've asked for.
Yes.
Listen to my argument.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think we will stop here. And Girish, you would like to say something?
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Pai sir, for this interaction and sparing your time. This was very informative interaction, sir.
Thank you.
And the recording of this interaction will be available on YouTube channel of CCIH.
Yes. Yes. So thank you very much, sir, for spending your valuable time, though you are very busy. And we learned a lot from this session. And thank you, Girish. Thank you, CCIH. Thank you, university authorities, for supporting conducting such sessions and we have sent this to all PhD students, those who are registering for our 2-credit course. I think sir was on the panel when we were designing this course, and now this course is made compulsory by UGC. So thank you very much, sir, from input from even last 2018 or 17, we started working on that paper. So thank you so much. Thank you, Girish. Thank you, Sanchita. And thank you, Sunil, for excellent organization. And thanks a lot.
Thank you once again for inviting me. It's always good to interact with you guys.
Yes, sir.
See you in
Thank
today's-
you. Thank you, Shubhda ma'am, for such a beautiful vote of thanks. And she's an associate professor at the Department of Library and Information Science at the Pune University. And she heads the Center for Publication Ethics at Savitribai Phule Pune University. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, sir, Sanjay sir, for those beautiful and valuable insights on the talk. They were very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Girish sir.
Yes. Can we close the meeting? And before we forget that we have sent the feedback form. So please fill it up and send it to us so that we will know your opinion about it. And I think we have corrected his email ID, and please check it out. Sir, is it SANJYAPAR, correct? Yes, that A was missing. Now it is correct. So you can contact sir if you have any specific question regarding publication and related areas. Thank you so much, sir.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you. So I'm closing the meeting. Yes.
Yes, thank you.